that profound silence when the house is empty, that feeling of being unseen. It's more than just loneliness. It's a quiet alarm that your brain is actively being rewired in ways that can be deeply damaging. The final insight I'll share is a simple, powerful way to begin reversing this process, and it's likely not what you think. Please, for you or someone you love, stay until the end. Invisible need. We need to begin with a fundamental truth, one that our busy modern world often encourages us to forget. We are social creatures. This isn't a preference, it isn't a personality trait. It is a biological imperative etched into our DNA through millions of years of evolution. Our ancestors survived not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they cooperated. They formed tribes, shared information, protected one another, and raised their young collectively. To be separated from the tribe was quite literally a death sentence. Your brain, the very same organ that sits in your skull today, still carries this ancient programming. It understands, at a primal level, that connection equals safety and isolation equals danger. Think of your brain like a plant. You can give it the best soil and the perfect amount of water, but if you lock it in a dark closet away from the sun, it will wither. For the human brain, social connection is the sunlight. Our society has created a strange paradox. We are more connected than ever through technology, yet so many of us experience a profound sense of isolation. This is particularly true as we grow older. The rhythms of life change. We may retire from a job that provided daily social structure. Our children may grow up and move away, building their own busy lives. We may lose a life partner, the one person with whom we shared everything. Suddenly, the home that was once bustling with energy and noise becomes quiet. The silence can be deafening. It's so easy to slip into a routine of solitude without even realizing it's happening. A day turns into a week into a month, and before you know it, the circle of regular, meaningful contact has become alarmingly small. What's crucial to understand is that the loneliness that stems from this is not just a fleeting emotion. It's not a sign of weakness or a personal failing. It is a biological signal, just like hunger or thirst. When your stomach growls, it's your body's way of saying, "I require nutrients to function." When your mouth feels dry, it's your body crying out for water. In the exact same way, that deep, aching feeling of loneliness is your brain sending out a powerful, desperate signal that says, "I require social connection to function." It is a state of emergency. We have been taught to ignore this signal, to push through it, to be strong and independent. But ignoring your brain's call for connection is as dangerous as ignoring its call for food or water. The consequences are not just emotional, they are physiological, structural, and deeply damaging. So, when we talk about what happens to the brain without this vital nutrient, we are not talking about something abstract. We are talking about a cascade of measurable physical changes. We're looking at a brain under duress, a brain that is trying to operate without one of its most critical components for survival and well-being. It begins to adapt to this state of deprivation, but the adaptations are not healthy. They are defense mechanisms that, over time, begin to break down the very cognitive and emotional systems that make us who we are. Before we look at the specific parts of the brain that suffer, we must first accept this foundational idea. Social isolation is not a state of mind, it is a state of siege on the brain, and acknowledging the severity of that siege is the first step toward understanding how to lift it. Brain shrinkage. This may be difficult to hear, but it is one of the most critical findings in neuroscience today, and we must face it directly. Chronic social isolation doesn't just change how your brain functions, it can physically change its structure. I mean that quite literally. Key areas of the brain can actually lose volume. They shrink. This is not a metaphor, it is a physical reality that scientists can observe on fMRI scans. The brain, like a muscle, operates on a use it or lose it principle. When a muscle isn't exercised, it atrophies. When critical circuits in the brain are not used, the neurons that form them can weaken their connections, and the supportive tissue can diminish. The brain prunes away what it perceives as unnecessary, and without regular social engagement, it tragically begins to perceive its own social hardware as unnecessary. Two areas are particularly vulnerable to this shrinkage. The first is the prefrontal cortex, located right behind your forehead. This is the sophisticated executive part of your brain. It's responsible for decision-making, planning, moderating social behavior, and expressing your personality. Every time you engage in a conversation, you are giving your prefrontal cortex a strenuous workout. You have to interpret what someone is saying, read their tone of voice and body language, formulate a response, decide what's appropriate to say and what's not, and hold your own thoughts in mind while listening to theirs. It's an incredibly complex dance. When you're isolated, that dance stops. Your prefrontal cortex is left idle, and over time, this lack of stimulation can lead to a measurable loss of gray matter. The CEO of your brain becomes less effective, making it harder to solve problems and regulate your impulses. The second, and perhaps even more concerning area, is the hippocampus. If you imagine your brain as a library, the hippocampus is the head librarian. It's responsible for forming and retrieving memories, particularly your life story, what we call autobiographical memory. It takes your experiences and files them away so you can recall them later. Social interaction is rich with memory-making events. You remember a friend's funny story, a grandchild's recent accomplishment, or the details of a shared meal. All of these experiences are processed by the hippocampus, keeping it active and healthy. In a state of prolonged isolation, there are simply fewer new, meaningful experiences to process. The days blend into one another. The hippocampus is underutilized, and just like the prefrontal cortex, it can begin to shrink. This has profound implications for our ability to remember not just new information, but the very stories that make up our lives. Think of an astronaut who spends months in the zero-gravity environment of space. Without the constant resistance of Earth's gravity, their muscles and bones begin to weaken and lose density. They must follow a rigorous exercise regimen just to mitigate this damage. Social isolation is like putting your brain in a state of zero gravity. It removes the daily natural resistance and stimulation that comes from interacting with others. The mental effort of navigating social worlds is the gravity that keeps our brains robust and strong. Without it, we risk a silent, invisible atrophy. It's a sobering thought, but understanding this physical process is what empowers us to fight against it. The damage isn't inevitable. It is a consequence of deprivation, and that means it can be addressed by restoring what was lost. Cognitive decline. The physical shrinkage of the brain is not an abstract anatomical change. It leads directly to a decline in our cognitive abilities, the very tools we use to navigate our world and make sense of our lives. When the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex lose volume, their functions become impaired. This isn't something that happens overnight. It's a gradual creeping fog that can slowly settle over our minds, making everything just a little bit harder. It often starts in ways that are easy to dismiss as just a normal part of getting older. You might find yourself searching for a common word that's right on the tip of your tongue, or walking into a room and completely forgetting why you went in there. You might have more trouble following the plot of a movie or a book. These small slips in what we call working memory and processing speed can be some of the earliest signs. As the isolation continues, these effects can become more pronounced. The memory issues tied to the struggling hippocampus become more apparent. It's not just forgetting a name, it's struggling to recall important recent events or conversations. This can be frightening and disorienting. At the same time, the decline in the prefrontal cortex impacts what we call executive functions. These are the higher order skills that allow us to plan, organize, solve problems, and stay focused on a task. A healthy, socially engaged brain is constantly honing these skills. Planning a get-together with friends, for example, requires organization, scheduling, and problem-solving. Debating a topic, even a friendly one about politics or sports, sharpens your ability to structure an argument and think critically. When these activities disappear from our lives, the skills themselves begin to dull. Suddenly, tasks that were once routine, like managing household finances or planning a week's worth of meals, can feel overwhelming. This brings us to a deeply serious and well-researched connection: the link between social isolation and an increased risk of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. Numerous large-scale, long-term studies have shown a powerful correlation. People with low levels of social contact are significantly more likely to develop dementia later in life. It's crucial to state that this is a risk factor, not a destiny, but it's a profound one. We often think of dementia as a purely biological disease of the brain, but this research shows that our social environment plays a massive role in our brain's resilience. The concept here is called cognitive reserve. Think of it as a savings account for your brain. Every time you learn something new, solve a complex problem, or have an engaging conversation, you are making a deposit into your cognitive reserve. A life rich with social connection builds a large reserve. Then, when the inevitable age-related changes or pathologies start to appear in the brain, it has more capacity, more backup circuitry to work around the damage. It can maintain function for longer. A person who has lived in isolation, however, has had fewer opportunities to build this cognitive reserve. Their savings account is smaller, so when the brain starts to face challenges, it has less resilience to fall back on. The symptoms of cognitive decline and dementia may appear earlier and progress more quickly. This isn't about intelligence, it's about engagement. It's about keeping the brain active, challenged, and connected to the world around it. The fog of cognitive decline that settles in during periods of loneliness isn't just a feeling. It is the functional consequence of an understimulated brain and a stark warning sign of the increased vulnerability to more severe cognitive conditions down the road. Emotional toll. While the cognitive effects of isolation are devastating, the emotional toll is often what people feel first and most acutely. Our emotional well-being is intricately tied to our social connections. Humans are wired to co-regulate their emotions, meaning we rely on cues and feedback from others to manage how we feel. A reassuring smile, a comforting touch, a shared laugh, the simple act of someone listening to our troubles. These are not just pleasantries, they are powerful biological regulators of our mood. They trigger the release of neurotransmitters like oxytocin and serotonin in the brain, chemicals that promote feelings of trust, calm, and happiness. When we are cut off from these interactions, we are cut off from a primary source of our own positive brain chemistry. Our emotional state becomes destabilized. This is why social isolation is one of the single biggest risk factors for developing clinical depression and anxiety disorders. When the brain is starved of positive social input, its landscape can begin to change. It can get stuck in negative feedback loops. A small worry that a friend might have helped you dismiss can fester and grow into a consuming anxiety. A sad mood that a shared activity could have lifted can deepen into the heavy, persistent darkness of depression. The isolated brain loses its perspective. Without the mirror of others to reflect back a balanced view of reality, our own negative thoughts can become our only reality. We start to believe the stories our anxious or depressed brain tells us, that we are a burden, that no one cares, that things will never get better. This isn't a failure of character, it is a predictable biochemical consequence of starvation. You are starving for connection. A fascinating and cruel twist occurs in the brain during chronic isolation. It can enter a state of hypervigilance for social threats. Research shows that the brains of lonely individuals are more likely to interpret neutral social cues as negative. A person who is just glancing in your direction might feel like they are staring critically. A neutral tone of voice in a checkout clerk might sound rude or dismissive. The brain, in its deprived state, becomes defensively wired to expect rejection. It's an ancient survival mechanism kicking into overdrive. If you're alone in the wild, you must be extremely wary of any potential threat. But in the modern world, this backfires catastrophically. It makes the very thing you need, social connection, feel dangerous and painful. This creates a vicious cycle. Loneliness makes you fear social contact, which in turn leads to more avoidance and deeper loneliness. This emotional dysregulation affects everything. Our ability to manage stress plummets. Minor frustrations can feel like major catastrophes. Our emotional resilience, our ability to bounce back from setbacks, becomes thin. We may feel more irritable, more cynical, or simply emotionally numb, like we're watching our own lives from behind a pane of glass. This emotional toll is not a side effect of loneliness. It is the core of the experience. It is the brain's cry of distress, manifested as emotional pain. It's a fundamental misunderstanding to tell someone who is lonely to simply cheer up. That is like telling someone who is hungry to simply not feel hungry. The problem is not the feeling itself, but the absence of the essential nutrient that would resolve it: stress overload. The damage from social isolation does not stop at the boundaries of your skull. It floods through your entire body through one powerful channel: the stress response system. Our bodies are designed to handle short-term stress. When you face a threat, your brain triggers the release of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. This is the fight or flight response. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure goes up, and your senses sharpen, preparing you to deal with the danger. Once the threat passes, your body is supposed to return to a state of calm. The problem with chronic loneliness is that the brain perceives it as a constant, low-grade threat. Remember that ancient programming? Alone equals danger. As a result, the body never gets the all-clear signal. It remains stuck in a state of high alert. This means the stress hormone cortisol, which is helpful in short bursts, is continuously trickling into your bloodstream. This chronic elevation of cortisol is incredibly destructive over time. One of its primary roles during a stress response is to suppress non-essential functions, and one of the first things it suppresses is the immune system. In an immediate life or death situation, you don't need to be fighting off a cold virus. But when this suppression is ongoing, it leaves you vulnerable. Studies have consistently shown that lonely individuals have a weaker immune response. They are more susceptible to catching common viruses like the cold and flu, and when they do get sick, the illness may be more severe and last longer. Wounds may heal more slowly. Your body's ability to defend itself is compromised because it's constantly diverting resources to manage a perceived threat that never ends. Beyond the immune system, this constant stress overload contributes to chronic inflammation throughout the body. Inflammation is a natural part of the healing process, but when it's chronic, it's like a slow-burning fire that damages healthy tissues and organs. Chronic inflammation is a known contributing factor to a host of the most serious health conditions we face as we age. This includes heart disease, as inflammation can damage the lining of the arteries. It includes type 2 diabetes, as it can interfere with insulin resistance. It's linked to autoimmune disorders and even certain types of cancer. The emotional pain of loneliness, mediated through the brain's stress response, translates directly into physical disease. Think of it like this: leaving your car's engine running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Even if it's just idling, the constant strain will cause parts to wear out and break down much faster than they should. That is what chronic loneliness does to your body. It leads to higher blood pressure, putting a strain on your heart and blood vessels. It can disrupt your sleep patterns, preventing the deep, restorative rest your brain and body need to repair themselves. It exhausts you. It ages you. Scientists have even found that chronic loneliness can accelerate aging at the cellular level by shortening our telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of our chromosomes. This is the ultimate physical proof of how deeply our need for connection is woven into our biology. The pain that begins in the mind as an emotional ache becomes a very real, very physical assault on our long-term health and vitality. Rebuilding connections. After hearing all of this, it would be easy to feel a sense of despair, but I want to pivot now to the most important part of this entire conversation: hope. The science that reveals the damage of isolation is the very same science that illuminates the path back to health. The single most remarkable fact about your brain is its lifelong capacity for change. This is called neuroplasticity. The connections in your brain are not fixed in stone. They can be weakened, but they can also be strengthened. Your brain can form new pathways and even generate new neurons well into your 90s and beyond. This means that no matter how long you have felt isolated, no matter how foggy your mind may feel, it is never, ever too late to begin the process of rebuilding. You can give your brain the stimulation it needs to heal and grow again. The key is to start small. The idea of putting yourself out there can be overwhelming, especially if your social muscles have atrophied and your brain is hyper-vigilant to rejection. So don't start with a big crowded party. Start with a single manageable step. The goal initially is quality, not quantity. One 10-minute heartfelt phone call with a family member or an old friend can provide more neurological benefit than 3 hours in a room full of strangers. Start by thinking of just one person you could reach out to. Maybe it's a neighbor, a former colleague, or a cousin you haven't spoken to in a while. Pick up the phone, or if that feels like too much, write a short email or even a letter. The simple act of formulating your thoughts and reaching out begins to reactivate those dormant social circuits. From there, you can gradually expand your circle of comfort. The next step could be simply re-engaging with the world in a low-stakes way. Go to a library, a coffee shop, or a park and just sit and be around other people. You don't even have to talk to anyone. Just observing the comings and goings, the human activity, provides a gentle form of stimulation for the brain. It reacclimates you to a social environment. When you're ready, look for activities that are built around a shared interest. This is a brilliant strategy because it gives you an automatic, built-in topic of conversation and connects you with people who already have something in common with you. A book club, a gardening group, a local historical society, a walking club, or a church group are all wonderful examples. The focus is on the activity and the social connection happens naturally as a byproduct. Remember to be patient and compassionate with yourself. If you went to the gym for the first time after years away, you wouldn't try to lift the heaviest weight. You would start light and build your strength up slowly. It's the same with social fitness. Your first few interactions might feel awkward. You might feel tired afterwards. That's perfectly normal. That's the feeling of a muscle being worked again. Celebrate the small victories. You made the phone call. You went to the library. You attended one meeting of a group. Each of these steps is a deposit into your cognitive reserve, a dose of medicine for your brain. You are turning the ship around, one small, courageous act at a time. The path out of isolation is not a leap. It is a series of gentle steps back toward the world. Lifelong plasticity. I want to reinforce this idea of neuroplasticity because it is the scientific foundation for our hope. For decades, it was believed that the adult brain was largely a finished product, that by a certain age, what you had was what you were stuck with. We now know that is fundamentally untrue. Your brain is a dynamic, living, and constantly adapting organ. Think of the pathways in your brain like trails through a forest. When you are socially engaged, you are constantly walking on these social trails, keeping them clear, wide, and easy to navigate. When you become isolated, you stop using those trails. Over time, they become overgrown with weeds and difficult to find. The process of rebuilding connections is like getting a machete and a walking stick and starting to clear those paths again. The first few steps are the hardest, but with each new interaction, the path becomes a little clearer, a little easier to travel. With persistence, those overgrown trails can become well-worn highways once more. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a man we'll call Arthur. After his wife passed away and he retired, his world shrank. His days were quiet and structured around solitary habits. He felt a mental fog, had trouble remembering things, and his doctor noted his blood pressure was creeping up. He felt emotionally flat. Acknowledging his deep loneliness, Arthur took one tiny step. He made a commitment to walk to a nearby park bench every morning at 10 a.m., a time when other regulars were often there. For the first week, he just sat and nodded to people. The second week, he began saying, "Good morning." By the third week, he'd struck up a brief conversation with another man about the weather. This small, consistent act began to clear a new trail in his brain. The man introduced him to a small group that played cards in the park. Arthur hadn't played in years, but he joined them. Learning the rules again, strategizing, and engaging in the light-hearted banter was a significant workout for his prefrontal cortex and hippocampus. This leads to the final and most powerful insight I promised you at the start. The most effective way to reverse the damage of isolation is not just to seek out connection, but to find a sense of purpose that involves others. This shifts your mindset from being a passive recipient of social contact to an active giver. When Arthur noticed that a woman in his apartment building was struggling with her groceries, he started helping her. This gave him a reason to connect and a sense of being useful. He later began volunteering at the local library for a few hours a week, reading to children. He wasn't just combating loneliness anymore, he was contributing. He had a reason to get up in the morning, a place where people expected and valued him. Finding a purpose, whether it's mentoring, volunteering, caring for a pet, sharing a skill, or simply being the person who checks in on a neighbor, is the ultimate act of neuroregeneration. It lights up the reward centers of the brain, reduces stress, and provides an endless source of meaningful social interaction. It re-engages you with the tribe not just as a member, but as a vital contributor. Your brain does not just want to be entertained, it wants to be needed. Finding a purpose that links you to the well-being of others is the key that unlocks the most profound healing. It moves beyond simply alleviating a negative state, loneliness, and moves toward creating a positive one, a life of meaning and belonging. That is the ultimate goal, not just to survive, but to thrive. This is within your grasp because your brain is built to do it. It is waiting for you to give it a reason, to clear that path, and to walk back into a life of connection. Your brain is not your enemy. It has not abandoned you. It is simply responding with remarkable and predictable accuracy to the environment you've placed it in. When it is deprived of its vital nutrient of social connection, it adapts for survival in a lonely world. But you hold the power to change that environment. You can feed your brain what it has been starving for. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It can begin with a single quiet hello, a phone call, a shared cup of tea. These small acts are declarations of hope. They are whispers to your brain that it is safe to come out of its defensive crouch, that connection is possible, that the long winter of isolation can finally end. The journey back to cognitive clarity, emotional balance, and physical health begins with that one simple, courageous step toward another human being. This video just stopped me in my tracks. I've been living alone for 5 years since my wife died, and I kept telling myself the brain fog and feeling emotionally numb was just getting old. I've been so worried about dementia. The idea that this is my brain literally starving for connection and the chapter on the stress overload, that explains so much about my health lately. It's not my fault, it's a condition. That reframes everything. Thank you, sincerely. Tomorrow, I'm going to call my old work buddy Robert. It's been too long. 106,4.